All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy Schiefling, and I'm a Ross MBA grad and the founder and chief nerd of Breaking Into Tech. Now, Breaking Into Tech is a new website designed to help any student land a very cool tech job, whether you can code or not. And to get started, let me go ahead and share my screen with you. So hold on one second. Here we go. All right, so we're in business here. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited to chat with you today. What I'm really excited about is to talk about these two favorite topics of mine, technology and careers. And before we begin, I've got to warn you about two things. My first confession is that I'm not some tech guru with a CS degree from Stanford. I don't have millions of dollars in venture backing. Instead, I'm a former kindergarten teacher, which means that I'm all about class participation. So just know that there will be plenty of chances to ask questions throughout. Just use the built-in chat system. And just to make sure things are working right now, go ahead and start chatting some things in just to confirm that everything is working correctly. So there's a questions app built into Google Hangouts on Air. Go ahead and chat some questions in just so I can see those. And just so you know, guys, if you go to Q&A, if you go to the sort of part at the top of the screen where you see the 9 little matrix boxes, you can choose Q&A, and you can start asking questions right there. So for example, I can say, Jeremy, how did you get your start in tech? And submit that. And that's how you ask questions. So feel free to ask questions just like that as we go through. All right. Now also know that because this is an MBA presentation, I'm also not above a little cold calling. So please hold on to your hats as we go along here. Now, speaking of hats, the other thing to know about me is that I am unapologetically a huge nerd. This is literally what I wore to prom back in the day. And no, I did not have a date then because this is what I was doing all day. I was getting really excited about my first computer because it had not just one, but 2 floppy disk drives. I was getting stoked that I was learning about this thing called DOS that had all these top secret commands that I could use to control my computer. And especially, above all, I was loving the crazy sound that my modem made when I would go onto the internet for the first time through things like Prodigy or CompuServe or America Online, which was always quickly followed by my mom yelling up to me, Jeremy, get off the phone line. But that said, it wasn't until later in life that I realized my passion could be more than just a hobby. That's because on September 27th, 2000, I came across this page. And perhaps you've seen it before. Well, back in 2000, 3 things really stood out to me. I remember thinking, first of all, I can't believe this Google thing really works. After Alta Vista and Lycos and Yahoo and all these other players that just gave me spam, finally, Google can really find stuff that I want, and it makes the internet work. Secondly, I couldn't believe that Yahoo was dumb enough to compliment the company that's clearly going to destroy them. And third, and most importantly, I couldn't believe that I could actually work for a company like Google. A company doing this cool of a project, this cool of a service, might someday want to hire me. The thing is, though, it wasn't until May 15th, 2011, that I finally got on the bus. And this is the shuttle from San Francisco to Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. And May 15th, as it turns out, was the first day of intern training. But this bus didn't just take me to work. What it really did is it launched my career. Because after Apple, I went on to lead LinkedIn's education marketing team. And then I started hiring other MBAs into the tech world. And then later on still, I became the VP of marketing at a VC-funded startup. So you might think, great, here's another MBA success story that just makes me feel bad about myself, makes me feel inadequate. Thanks for nothing, Jeremy. But that would neglect just one minor problem with my story. And that is the fact that, yeah, I followed my passion, but it took me 11 years. So what I really want to share with you today is how not to be like me, how not to waste time, how not to spend 10 years wandering in the desert. Because a decade is way too long to wait if you already know what you're passionate about today. And I suspect the fact that you're at HEC, that you're in this program focused on technology, means that, like myself, you know what you want. So instead of wasting time, I'm going to give you two things. Number one, I'm going to give you a complete list of all the dumb mistakes that I made along the way. Every little sin, every little error, so you don't have to stumble through that same misery. And I'm also going to give you, number two, all the shortcuts that I had to earn the hard way time and again. So that way, as you launch your own career, you can pour some rocket fuel onto it. You can move way faster than I did and be successful immediately. So, without further ado, the 7 deadly sins of tech recruiting. But before I get to that, as promised, I want to give you a little pop quiz. I told you this was going to be serious now. Time for some cold calling. So here goes. We all know that nerds are the kings of Silicon Valley. They're the kings of every hot tech company from here to Paris to Mumbai. Maybe even the whole world, the way that software is eating the world. My question for you is, what % of tech workers do you think actually have a computer science degree? So what you should do right now is go to the top of your window, find those little 9 matrix boxes, and click on the Questions app. And once you open up the Questions app, you can type in your answers. So you could say, maybe it's 10% of tech workers or 20% of tech workers. What I'd love to see is your guesses right now. So go ahead and plug those guesses in. Again, if you go right to the top of your Hangouts window, you can see 9 little matrix boxes. And from there, what you can choose is the Q&A app where you can start asking questions, putting things in. Let me just check that out real quick. Hold on one second. All right. So I see that some folks are viewing, which is great. Remember to answer that question by going up to that box. All right, back to the presentation here. Here we go. So hold on to those guesses for a second, guys, because we're going to come back to this in a few minutes. But first, it's time for my original tech sin, which is probably the worst thing that I ever did in the tech world. And that was believing that I didn't belong. Because even though I was a nerd by passion, I was an educator by training. And every time I thought about taking the plunge, I'd see headlines like these. And if you've ever been anywhere on the internet, anywhere around tech coverage, you know exactly the ones I'm talking about how computer science is so hot, about how liberal arts suck. And even President Obama in the United States has gone on record as saying that art history majors are basically worthless and might as well work in a factory. And so as a result, my diploma, my background in education and political science became my secret shame. But here's the thing. Tech has a dirty little secret of its own. And it's not just that, yeah, non-coders can get tech jobs sometimes. It's that non-coders, people like you and me, actually have the majority of tech jobs. Because believe it or not, the data from the latest census actually shows that for every single technical job created, 4 non-technical ones spring up. Now you might wonder, why exactly would that be, Jeremy? Why would technical jobs lead to the creation of ones for non-coders? Especially because we've all heard those legends about the super genius coders like Zuckerberg or Gates, who built entire fortunes on their programming skills. But the truth is, even the hottest coder can't do it by themselves. Instead, they need someone to manage their code, to market it, and to protect it. And the end result is that at this very moment in the tech industry, there are 3 times more non-technical folks than techies. And those non-techies are doing pretty much every job under the sun. Sales, marketing, strategy, business development, finance, research, HR, accounting. The list goes on. And there's not a single coder in sight. Plus, get this, those same roles aren't just held by a bunch of business majors or CS majors. Instead, they're actually held by liberal arts majors. So remember my opening question about computer science degrees? Well, it turns out that fewer than 5% of tech workers have them. So even though there were some guesses about 10% or 20% or 30%, a very tiny minority of techies actually have a CS background. And instead, there are actually more liberal arts folks in tech than computer scientists. Most importantly, though, the bottom line is that I was dead wrong to talk myself into the tech game. Because no matter your background, tech really is wide open. Now, let me prove it to you. So I put you guys on the spot with my pop quiz before, and I apologize for all the high pressure questioning. But this is your chance to return the favor by testing my claims. So here's my question. Of all the folks listening right now, everyone at HEC, who here had the craziest field of study at your undergraduate university? Anything from interpretive dance studies to poultry science to underwater basket weaving. Go ahead and use that Q&A app to chat those in. And Christoph, if you're with some fellow HEC students right now, feel free to chat those in on behalf of your classmates. So again, what did you study in your undergraduate university? And I'll pick one example to sort of prove how wide open tech is. Go ahead and chat those in right now. Agriculture, I love it. Okay, so we have got some farmers in the room, which is awesome. So here's what I want to do for you guys. I'm going to take you behind the scenes, and I'm going to show you what the LinkedIn recruiter platform looks like. Now, this is not the LinkedIn that you use every single day to network with alumni. This is the one that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for Fortune 500 companies to recruit top talent like yourselves. And so what I've already done here is I've pulled up all 22 million people around the globe who identify as internet professionals on LinkedIn. So a pretty massive data set. And what I'm going to do is, because Christoph has thrown down the challenge, I'm going to come down and I'm going to filter by a specific facet. In this case, field of study. So I'm a little nervous now because I've never tested this before, but I'm going to go ahead and put in agriculture. And that includes agricultural operations, related sciences. And I'm going to see exactly how many of these 22 million internet folks have that background. My fingers are firmly crossed. And sure enough, when we come back up, even though that background might seem totally irrelevant as far as the tech world is concerned, there are almost 40 folks who have that background. And they have it from around the globe. You know, they're entrepreneurs. They're in India. They're in China. They're working at cool companies in the US and Netherlands. And so my point here is not that necessarily agriculture or dance studies or whatever you did in undergrad is the perfect path to tech, but you shouldn't rule yourself out. If you want to work for a place like Groupon or any other kind of cool tech firm, just because you have a background in agriculture or something else doesn't mean you're out of the game. In fact, as you're about to see in my next sin, you're totally in the game if you play your cards right. So here's how. And thank you so much to everyone who participated there. So my next biggest sin was ultimately, as stupid as it was not to focus on the tech world immediately, talking myself out of it. When I finally tried to break into tech, I tried to be someone that I wasn't. Now, as I mentioned, I figured that the tech world would have absolutely no use for a guy like this, a teacher, an educator, someone who didn't belong. And so when I spent the better part of the 2000s dropping applications like these to tech company after tech company after tech company, I made a conscious decision that instead of highlighting my background, I was going to cover it up. I was going to treat my education experience like it didn't exist. And so instead of talking about that awesome experience in the classroom, I'd say these phony baloney things like, I'm an experienced professional with a long track record of results. Or even worse, all these buzzwords like, I'm a detail-oriented team player. I specialize in out-of-the-box thinking. Too bad, as it turned out, that strategy was flat out dumb. Because what I didn't realize was, yeah, maybe there are some traditional companies out there, like ones that might be recruiting at HEC right now, that do want you to be all buttoned up. You know the drill. Gray flannel suits, red power ties, the whole corporate look. But the tech firms that I worshipped back then, and that I still idolize today, were actually founded by people who were deathly allergic to that stuff. Take Steve Jobs, for example. Sure, if he had wanted to, Steve probably could have been a pretty good VP of something or other at IBM. But he specifically rejected that way of doing business, that old school style, a traditional approach. He created a company and a culture and a vision that was modeled on a new way and a new approach. And so when I took that old school approach of doing things the IBM way circa 1919, not only didn't it help me fit in, instead, it really just emphasized how much I didn't belong. It was the equivalent of walking into a typical tech meeting full of hoodies like this one with a Don Draper haircut right out of the 1950s and a leather briefcase, which meant that all those applications I told you guys about, they went absolutely nowhere year after year. Until finally, 10 and 11 years later, I finally wised up and I showed the tech world that, hey, I'm just a little bit crazy too. Specifically, when I applied to Apple, I figured, all right, I've just wasted 10 years getting nowhere. I may as well show these guys that two can play the whole think different game. So instead of doing what I usually did, which was try to hide my teaching background, bury it as a footnote in the bottom, I actually led with it as a strength. I busted it out right there in the first paragraph of my cover letter. And I said, hey, I'm the kind of guy who actually knows what your customers need, because I've been using Apple products with the toughest customers out there, a bunch of 5-year-olds. Who else can claim that they've got that crazy background that's grounded in real world experience? And sure enough, only when I pulled back the blanket on my true experiences did I get my first tech interview. So the bottom line, guys, is you've got to remember that tech was founded by a bunch of weirdos. So if you've got something unique in your background, don't be like me. Don't think of it as a problem. See it for what it truly is, which is an opportunity. Don't be like me and hold back. Instead, let loose and be true to yourself. All right, so get ready again, because now it's pop quiz time once again. So for those of you folks who read the Wall Street Journal out there, you might recall that the newspaper did a really big story on Yelp this summer after its stock plummeted 25% in a single day. More than $1 billion of valuation was essentially liquidated overnight. And my question for the group, and again, Christoph, I would totally appreciate it if you chat this in, is does anyone at HEC know why Yelp lost $1 billion of value on July 29th? Go ahead and chat those in. And thanks again, Christoph, for being the ringleader here. I do appreciate it. And actually, while Christoph gathers those answers, I'm going to look through here, and I see that everyone is answering, which is awesome. If there are any questions as we go along, I'll encourage you to ask those immediately. So for instance, if I talk about tech roles or my own experience, and that strikes a chord with you and you have a specific question, just like my kindergartners, don't hold back. Go ahead and ask that question immediately, and I'll answer it in real time. All right. I see people are discussing right now. I can only imagine what the scene is like in Paris as you guys deliberate. And let me do this. In the interest of time, because I know it's late where you are, let me move ahead and I'll come back to this Yelp scenario in a couple of slides. So hold on for a second. And in the meantime, let me dig into my third sin, which was getting stuck in a scarcity mindset. And what I mean by that unfamiliar term, scarcity mindset, is that just like a kid in a toy store, I got totally fixated on the perfect present. Now, as a kid back in the 80s, that meant hands down Optimus Prime. Because even back when Michael Bay, the producer and director, was still making Vanilla Ice music videos, which is absolutely true, by the way, and you can look it up on IMDb, Optimus Prime was easily the coolest, most badass Transformer there was, not some weak sauce copycat. And so flash forward a couple of years, when I was an MBA, that meant that only the coolest Optimus Prime of technology, aka Google, of course, would do for me. It's just too bad that everyone else was thinking the same thing. Because sure enough, as you've certainly heard by now, Google gets about 2.5 million applications per year, which means just like the toy stores that run out of Optimus Prime every single Christmas, I was out of luck. Now, after getting nowhere with the scarcity mindset and striking out time and again with Google year after year, I finally began to realize the sneaky truth about the tech world. Because here's the real deal. Here's what no one tells you, but it's so important to know. Even though there are a handful of companies out there that certainly have way more applications than they can handle, so the Googles of the world and the Apples of the world, jobs in Silicon Valley are not, and I repeat, not, the scarcest resource in the tech world. Instead, the truly scarce resource, the truly scarce commodity is talent. Not jobs, but talent. Which brings us back to Yelp. Because on July 29th, something really important happened. And I see that the guess was that the co-founder left. Maybe that was a part of it. Maybe that's true. But Yelp lost $1 billion of value in a single day, not because they had unhappy customers or an atrocious bug, or because people thought that their rating system was gamed somehow, which maybe it is, but because they literally could not hire enough salespeople in a super tight labor market. And let me repeat that key word there, salespeople. Not engineers, not web developers, not data scientists, just regular old business people like you and me had become the hottest commodity all the way from Apple down to Zenefits. All of which just goes to show, if even Yelp, this mega brand, has trouble hiring talent, what chance do any of the thousands of no-name startups out there have in a tight labor market? And that, my friends, is where the prize mindset comes in. Because if the scarcity mindset is all about putting all of your eggs into a single basket, the kind of thing I did where you apply to Google every year and only Google or only Apple and get nowhere with it. And the prize mindset, by differentiation, by comparison, is all about broadening your horizons to find the next Google. Because every single day, all across the world, from San Francisco to New York to Paris to Moscow, there are dozens of startups that are receiving millions of dollars to launch and scale their dreams. And you might think, wow, that would be the greatest day of my life. If I was a founder and I just received a 7 or 8 figure check from a venture capitalist, I'd be popping open the champagne. But from actually talking to founders, I've discovered it's quite the opposite. Instead, on that day, as excited as they are, they're actually quaking in their boots. And that's because the venture capital mafia has basically given them an offer they can't refuse, which is, you need my money. So here's $10 million today. Go ahead and spend that. But in exchange, I expect you to come back in 3 years with $100 million or $1 billion, which is certainly a tall order for anyone, but especially if you're a programmer. And you've got to remember that the vast majority of founders right now are programmers and coders by trade, which means that their specialty, coding and programming and building out all of the technical platforms, means they don't have the first clue how to grow $1 billion business. And that's where you, the MBA, come in. Because if you can approach this entrepreneur at their moment of crisis, it actually becomes a moment of opportunity for you. They don't just need great people at some distant date in the future, they need them immediately. And even better, if you can approach them not just as a great piece of talent, but with awesome ideas to grow their business and a little caffeine to keep them fueled, what you can do is actually get an interview on the spot. So for example, when I was in San Francisco a couple summers ago, and I reached out to a newly funded entrepreneur in the education space and said, hey, I'm a former kindergarten teacher. I'm so glad that you just got this new funding because I love your product and I used it with my own class. Could I buy you a cup of coffee and share some ideas for reaching more teachers like me? As skeptical as I was, as nervous as I was, he jumped at the chance because he was a programmer by trade and he wasn't really sure how to do marketing and business development. And the fact that I was willing to share those ideas with him gave him a real shot to grow his business in a way that the VCs were expecting him to do. So that's one way to get an interview. But maybe one interview isn't enough for you guys. You say, hey, Jeremy, I want to have lots of opportunity. So how about 2 interviews or 3 interviews? Because that's the kind of opportunity that only a VC can open up for you. So for example, let's say you're interested in Airbnb. In that case, you might want to get to know this guy, Alfred Lin, because he's on the board of Airbnb. He's a venture capitalist. But it also turns out that Alfred sits on the boards of Houzz and Stella and Dot and a couple of other really cool startups. So if you go to talk with Alfred and you share some ideas with him, he's really excited about you as a hot talent, not only do you have access to Airbnb, but you're potentially gaining entree to his whole portfolio. And so while there are lots of different tactics to expand your opportunity set beyond the Googles of the world, I hope the overall strategy is really clear here, which is don't be this guy. Don't be that classic Me Too MBA who follows the crowd and only goes after the most sought after companies. Instead, be this guy. Be Optimus Prime. Be the talent that everyone else wants. Be the prize. Because the bottom line is, there is so much opportunity out there. And the trick is, you just need to help it find you. So let me prove that point to you. Now, a question for Christoph and the group. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement around the startup world right now. There's so much money out there. All these startups are very hot in the pop culture. Well, one question that MBAs have asked me all across the country and all around the world is, yeah, I'd love to work at a startup, Jeremy, but can a startup realistically pay me enough, not just to pay off my loans, but to give me a little extra money to have a life left over? So to prove that point to you, I'd love to know, Christoph, what are people's favorite apps in the room right now? Uber, Candy Crush, whatever people are excited about, go ahead and chat those in. And then I'll do an example based on one of those hot startups, those hot apps. So chat those in right now. While you guys chat those in and think about it, I'm going to respond to a question. So the question is, do you think this kind of communication works in all cultures? So obviously, I am by far more immersed in the Silicon Valley culture than I am in the Parisian tech culture or the London tech culture or tech culture in Beijing or Shanghai. So I can't speak for those. But what I will say is that my experience thus far is whether you're American by birth or British by birth or French by birth, the tech world is so daunting and so challenging that if you're an entrepreneur and you've got this major pain point, where basically you've got to 10x or 100x a venture capitalist investment in you. No matter where you come from, you're desperate for ideas. You need someone to help guide you on that path to growth. And so if you guys can leverage your experience and your training at HEC, and you can reach out to the entrepreneur or the venture capitalist with specific ideas, that's going to carry the day for you. Because the beautiful thing about Silicon Valley is that probably more than any other industry, it's a meritocracy. Yeah, there are charges that it's too white, it's too Asian, it's too male, it's too techie. But beneath all of that, the people with really great ideas, the people who put themselves out there, do tend to rise to the top. So if you guys have great ideas, don't hold back. Don't say, oh, I'm just an MBA, I'm not a techie, I don't belong here. Reach out to those folks and put yourself out there, because I think that will translate into any culture. All right, so thank you so much, Christoph, for gathering the feedback from folks. Let's see. So I see Uber and Waze from Marlon. Thanks, Marlon. News Digest, City Mapper, Evernote. Very cool. So let me try this out. So if we go to some of these great questions, or great ideas, excuse me, let's try City Mapper. So I'm going to go to Crunchbase. And again, there are probably other sites that are just as good as this one, but I think Crunchbase is kind of the granddaddy of venture capital funding and following the flows of money. So if we try out City Mapper here, I don't even know that one myself, but I'm curious to see what we come up with. Turns out that City Mapper, even though it was just founded last year, it looks like, or maybe founded a couple years ago, but just got its first funding last year, already has $10 million in the bank, which is not too shabby for this tiny organization with just 3 employees on Crunchbase. And ultimately, what that means for you guys is if a company like City Mapper has $10 million and Uber has $1 billion and all these other guys have hundreds of millions, they'd be crazy not to pay you a fair salary as a really valuable employee. If you can come into City Mapper or Waze or any of these places, although of course Waze is bought by Google, you can make a case that, hey, I'm going to solve your biggest challenge. I'm going to solve that pain point of how do we go from where we are today to where we need to be in the future. They have more cash than they have talent, and they will pay for the talent and the expertise and the ideas that you bring. So the bottom line is that you should never, ever sort of talk yourself out of the startup world the way that I talked myself out of technology, because there's so much cash out there right now, and the entrepreneurs will part for it in exchange for your expertise. So thanks for playing along here. All right, back to the presentation. So my 4th deadly sin was that I focused on titles and not roles. And what I mean here is that when I got to B school, here's what my resume looked like. I had all these random nonprofit titles: fellow, program associate, whatever that means. And then on the other hand, I had a long list of all the tech titles that I wanted. As you can see, just like 2 Venn diagram bubbles basically floating in outer space in separate solar systems, there was 0 overlap between where I had been and where I wanted to go, at least at the title level. And at first, this was super discouraging because I'd spent so much energy and so much time trying just to get into business school, thinking that business school would be the transformative experience to get me into the tech world. And now all of a sudden, I felt like I was on the outside looking in once again. But then, spurred on by a little advice from Michigan, I dug deeper, and when I thought about the roles that I had actually done, not the arbitrary titles that some HR rep had chosen, but the actual substance of my work, I realized I had done some pretty cool things. As a teacher, I was forced to understand my students and their backgrounds, and a lot of them came from really tough backgrounds and broken homes. Because they were coming from these tough backgrounds, I had to work really hard to figure out ways to get them excited about learning, no matter their prior learning challenges. I had to engage them with awesome lessons and then ultimately evaluate their performance to prove to the director of my school, the community, and their families that these students were making great progress. And once I did that, I started to compare those past roles to the ones I wanted, in this case, product marketing. And lo and behold, I started to see all these hidden connections. So all this stuff that I thought was irrelevant actually was aligned really nicely with what a product marketer does every day. Because a marketer also has to be a master of their audience. A marketer also has to figure out how to reach their audience, even those who are really hard to engage. A marketer has to blow those users away with an awesome experience in the same way that I had to teach awesome lessons. And then just like a teacher, at the end of the day, a marketer has to go back to their boss and measure their impact, show them the ROI. And so at the bottom level analysis, being a marketer actually was not that different than what I'd already done, which was all well and good for me. But the question is, what about for you? Now, before we get to that, let's do a quick pop quiz. So, question for the group right now is, there are so many crazy titles out there in the tech world. And I apologize in advance that it's like an alphabet soup of all these different titles. PM versus PMM, BO versus BD. As a little challenge, I'd love, Christoph, to know if anyone in the room can explain the differences between these three different titles: BizOps, BizDev, and CorpDev. And if anyone's brave enough to do that, go ahead and chat it in. And while you guys think about that, let me respond to a question from Kartik. So Kartik says, and this is a really good question, Kartik, by the way, it's good if we can find a connection like you did, but what if we don't find a connection with past experience, yet we are still interested? And so what I'm going to get to in a little bit, Kartik, is you can absolutely try to dig deep into your past to find things that sort of tie your past experience to what you want to do in the future. But the other thing you should know, and this is relevant for probably all MBAs, because the reason you're in business school right now is most likely to transform your career, to try something new, is that tech, compared to all other industries, is just so fluid. So I know tons of folks from a single team at LinkedIn who went from, say, operations to marketing, from marketing to product management, from product management over to marketing. And so if you can get your foot in the door with something specific that you're already really good at, know that it's not going to be that hard to then transition to a different role. Because tech doesn't have those same hierarchical strictures that a lot of companies and industries do. And so you have more fluidity, more opportunities for transformation. Great question, Kartik. Let's see here. All right, so I guess no one felt brave enough to take on this question, which is totally fine, because I had absolutely no idea what these things were when I was in your shoes. So let's go back to it. How do you find your perfect role? And I'll explain in the course what these roles are about. The answer, of course, is that you've got to get a deep understanding of what these different roles are really like. Not just the titles, not just sort of the acronyms or the abbreviations, but actually, what do these people do all day? Most importantly, would you like doing it? So let me give you all a crash course right now, starting with the Apple car. So as you may have heard, Apple is supposedly working on a new car to rival Tesla's. And as a former Apple employee, I'm afraid I can neither confirm nor deny those rumors, although they are very strong. But the important thing is, whether it's true or not, what we need to realize is that any tech project, from building an app all the way to building a car, is necessarily a team effort. So let's use the iCar example as a way of exploring how the different roles play out and work together. So first of all, as rich as Apple is, there's no way they're going to drop billions of dollars on a terrible business. That's just not their style. So before Tim Cook goes all into this new car project, he's going to have the business operations team, aka BizOps, crunch the numbers. So these are former consultants, former analysts, who are going to look at the electric car market, and they're going to figure out, how large is it today? How fast will it grow in the future? What's the ROI of a potential project like this? And only once Tim has those numbers will he give it the green light, which means that it's now HR's turn to find the right people for the job. Now, tech moves way too fast to say, okay, we're going to go train thousands of people on how to be automotive engineers. So instead, all these recruiters from HR are going to go to LinkedIn and they're going to search for the perfect candidates, both from school and from the automotive industry, try to poach them away. But the thing is, that's still too slow for the tech world. So now Tim is getting nervous and he says, hey, my corporate development team, my former M&A bankers, can you please help me acquire a startup in this space? A group of sort of entrepreneurial automotive engineers or automotive designers who are already working in this world. And if we buy their startup in one fell swoop, we've now just brought on not just one staffer or two staffers, but a whole team of them. And with the team starting to come together, now the research function comes in and they brief them on the trends in the marketplace. So on the quantitative side, you've got these market researchers who help the team understand the demographics and the psychographics of the car buyers. So using surveys, using market research, they find out who's the right audience for this car and what do they care about. And then on the qualitative side, the user experience research team helps all these new hires analyze the specific frustrations of the audience for the existing options in the market. So for example, they could do a test drive with Tesla owners and figure out, does the Model X have not enough cup holders, too many cup holders? What are the pain points that the Apple car can really solve? Now, with these insights on hand, the product managers, the PM function, starts to scope out the high-level concept for the product. Working with engineers, with designers, they put together a list of specifications, known as specs or a roadmap, for exactly how the product should work and what it should do. And with that vision in place, it's now time for the project managers to work with those engineers to execute it. So yeah, the PM, the product management function, does the sexy high-level concepting, but the project managers have to come and do the dirty work of getting this job done. So they take those specs, they break it up into tasks, they delegate them to specific staff members, and then they manage that performance through daily and weekly stand-ups to make sure that this thing is going to launch on time. And at the same time that the engineering work is being done, the operations team is working just as hard to make sure that this car can not just be built, but built at scale. So they might partner with existing manufacturers who have extra capacity. They might develop their own factories and assembly lines. Either way, operations pros are building a really clear supply chain for every single part in this massive project, as well as the assembly capacity to bring those parts together into a finished product. So now the launch is on the horizon. Things are coming together nicely. So the marketing team is tasked with making sure that on launch day, there's at least as much demand in the market as there will be supply. And they do this in two ways. Number one, they create content. So you can easily imagine, a video that goes viral with Johnny Ive pontificating about the car's world-class aluminum. And then they also use campaigns, secondly, to get that message out there to the market. So the famous Apple keynotes right before the launch, or millions and millions of dollars of advertising spent on launch day that all stir that market into a frenzy. Now, the business development team realizes, hey, this is great. The car's coming together nicely. People are excited about it. There's just one big problem, which is people want to test and touch and use cars before they buy them. They're not like an iPhone where you're just going to sort of buy them over the internet. So to compensate for the lack of Apple dealerships, the business development team might go out there and forge a partnership with Hertz or another major car rental agency. So that way, at every single airport all around the world, any business traveler can test drive an Apple car before they purchase it. And in the same kind of vein, the sales team says, okay, maybe there are some Apple enthusiasts, some fanboys, who will buy this car sight unseen. But if we want to sell to businesses, to major organizational purchasers, we're going to need a lot more handholding. And so what the sales team would do is go, for instance, to the owner of a large taxi fleet. And they would say, we want to sell you 1,000 Apple cars. So we're going to actually walk you through this process step by step and handle any objections you might have. And that's how they close that deal. But it doesn't end there. Because Apple is all about delighting its customers, the point of sale is just the beginning, not the end. And so the customer success team or the customer support team works with existing clients to ensure they're satisfied. So for example, maybe they have a team of white gloved valets drive the new Apple cars right to the customer's driveway, or maybe they check in a year later with a free tune-up. Either way, they're making sure that people's satisfaction scores are off the chart. And of course, no product launch will be complete without a summation of the results. So just like this project started with spreadsheets with BizOps, it ends with spreadsheets because here, the finance and accounting teams crunch the data on the sales, they pass it over to Tim, and now Tim Cook goes on his quarterly earnings call, cracks a wide smile because he's happy to report that the Apple car has been a smashing success. So those are the dozen or so tech roles that don't necessarily require coding experience. Sometimes they do in things like product management, but there are certainly counterexamples to that like Amazon. But the real question is, which one is right for you? What I would say is your future all depends on your past. Because you can imagine all these different pre-MBA jobs laid out on a giant spectrum from super analytical at the top, like being a pricing consultant or something like that, to super interpersonal at the bottom, maybe being an elementary school teacher like I was. Well, it turns out if you have that kind of imagination, you can see that these different backgrounds line up pretty nicely with the wide range of tech jobs out there. So for example, if you were an analyst for a bank doing M&A before school, you'd be really well equipped to step into a corp dev role where you can come in and start acquiring startups. On the other hand, maybe you worked for a major NGO before business school and you led partnership building. In that case, business development would be a logical fit because again, you've got to forge those same kinds of partnerships. So I know this is a really important slide because it kind of lays out a roadmap from where you've been to where you want to go. So rather than force you to frantically write everything down, I'll let you know that you can actually download it for free on my website at breakinto.tech/bonus. And in addition to getting this entire slide and this entire deck, I'm also giving away a whole book. It's all about the different roles in technology. So even though we don't have time to cover everything in depth, you can learn about a day in the life of these roles, what the recruiters are looking for, and how they hire. So go ahead and grab those. And while you do that, I'm going to take a pause right now and see if there are any questions. So feel free to chat those in if you've got them. All right, so Christoph asked a great question. My apologies if there was someone else in the room who actually asked it. But Christoph says, do most companies follow the same logic in naming the functions? For example, someone is seeing that BizDev has been defined differently in different companies. And that's absolutely true. And again, that's part of the frustration, right? The fact that product management at Amazon and Google is program management at Microsoft. The fact that BizDev at Google might be about partnership building and BizDev in a company in Europe might be about sales. So obviously you're gonna have to translate from one company to another. But as we'll talk about later on, it's really key that instead of just sort of taking a high-level view of these things, you dive deep into the details, which means reaching out to alumni at all the companies you're excited about to learn about their specific experiences and how each company is different. And we'll get to that in a little bit. And thanks everyone for guessing the different kinds of roles between BizOps and BizDev and Corp Dev. I appreciate you guys being so willing to put yourself out there. All right, so it looks like we're good for questions for now. So let's keep moving here. So the bottom line is, yeah, tech titles are weird, and I apologize in advance for that. But the most important thing is, no matter what you've done before, there is absolutely a role in tech that suits you. The trick is to find the right fit and make a really compelling case that you belong, which, unfortunately for me, is exactly what I did not do in my fifth sin, which was turning myself into a commodity. So again, to give you guys a little chance to dig in here, I want to give you a pop quiz. And in this case, as you'll see on your screen shortly, we've got a piping hot cup of coffee, a spiffy new smartphone, and a stylish handbag. These three different products. And your pop quiz is to figure out, what do these products all have in common? Now, to give you a little hint here, let me ask it this way. Not only are these things related somehow, but do you know why marketing classes in particular love to teach cases about these kinds of products? So again, go ahead and chat in your answers for what these 3 products have in common. And of course, feel free to ask questions at any point. Happy to take those as we go along. Okay, so it sounds like there's probably a good debate raging in Paris right now, which is awesome. I wish I could be there with you guys. To keep it moving so we can get this done before you have to go to sleep tonight, I'll keep going, and then feel free to text in questions as we go along. The trick here is that these 3 products, as you may have guessed, are all commodity products and generic products on their own that in the hands of expert marketers have become differentiated. Now here's what I mean. By themselves, coffee, smartphones, purses, they're really just a bunch of commodities. Beans, silicon, leather, smashed together without much value on their own. And that's why you can still get a cup of coffee for $1 at any cheap cafe. You could still walk into any wireless store around the world and get a very cheap Taiwanese smartphone. And if you go to Canal Street in New York, and I'm sure there's a comparable street in Paris, you could buy a knockoff handbag for $5. But once you attach a powerful brand, all of a sudden, something interesting happens. That $1 cup of coffee now becomes a $5 Starbucks pumpkin spice latte. I'm not sure if Starbucks abroad sells the same thing, but it's basically this really sickly sweet drink with all its whipped cream, and people in America go crazy for it. They spend 5 times the normal price of coffee. That smartphone that your wireless store will just give away to you for free, basically, in the hands of Apple, becomes an $800 obsession. The kind of device that people line up around the block for all around the world. And that cheapo purse that you might buy from a guy with a van in the hands of Gucci becomes not just a purchase, but a 4-figure investment. And so that, my fellow MBAs, is the power of differentiation. But the really important thing here, just to twist it a little bit further, is to remember that neither Starbucks, nor Apple, nor Gucci make the indisputably best products in their categories. No one can objectively say that the iPhone is the best or Gucci is the best. And I'm sure if there are any coffee snobs in the room or any Android users in the room, they would be very happy to make that case. But what you can't deny is that what these companies do, without question, is to create separation from the other generic players in their respective markets. And then, very sneakily, they use that separation to justify a higher price point. So you can think of Apple's famous Think Different campaign from 15 years ago. Just linking their brand to Amelia Earhart or Albert Einstein or Gandhi was enough in many consumers' minds to rationalize a $300 price premium when you compared the original iMac to the main PC desktops of that day. Even Starbucks' Race Together project, which you may have heard about, which was this idea that at least in the US, Starbucks baristas and cashiers would hand someone a cup of coffee and then ask them how they felt about race relations. And it was this huge PR disaster. And it didn't really achieve its stated goal of getting Americans to think more broadly about race. But subconsciously, I would argue there was a huge success because in the minds of its customers, in the minds of Americans, it reinforced this notion that Starbucks is altogether a different kind of coffee bar. So for those of you who've been to like Dunkin' Donuts or a very low-class coffee store in America, I bet you can hardly imagine the cashier there handing you a donut and then asking you about homophobia or how you feel about foreign policy. And that difference, that rare uniqueness in a sea of caffeinated clones, That's what subtly gives Starbucks a psychological permission to now come in and charge you $6 for a couple of beans and sugar and ice. And you're like, okay, Jeremy, great. We know that Apple and Starbucks have these evil genius marketers. What else is new? What's that have to do with me? Well, the thing is, and this is really the important question, is once we accept the power of differentiation in the marketplace and we realize how critical it is for these billion-dollar businesses, we've got to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, how come we treat our own most precious resource like a commodity? And by that, I mean our talent, the one prized asset that no one can take away from us, that we're born with, that we work hard to earn, and that's always ours. And yet what I see time and time again as an MBA hiring manager in the tech space is that we routinely treat that same valuable resource, that same scarce asset, like a dollar cup of coffee at a cheap cafe, because we do stuff like this. And what you'll see on your screen in a second is the actual template that I used for years to send out cover letters. It would say things like, "Dear Sir or Madame, blah, blah, blah." And then if I remembered to, I would do a quick find and replace for the company's name, although unfortunately that was not always the case. Now, that might seem like a silly example, it might feel innocent enough, but please recognize it for its insidious truth, which is that this approach, this style of applying to companies all the same, is the human capital version of a commodity. It's one size fits all, but it's tailored to exactly none. And the problem is, once an approach like that catches on with a cohort or a business school or even a society, all of a sudden we're extras in the next Star Wars movie, which is a bad recipe in any industry, but especially in the technology one. Because as you've surely heard, innovation, competition, they move incredibly fast here. One day you're hot, the next you're not. And if you don't constantly strive to stand out, the next thing you know, you're BlackBerry, you're MySpace, you're Yahoo. Now, not only do generic applications ruin your own chances, but they also really ruin the day for this guy. Because he's a typical tech recruiter. And contrary to what you might imagine, his job actually isn't that glamorous. Sure, he gets to visit beautiful cities like Paris, to visit awesome students like you guys every now and then. But more often than not, he's locked up in his cube because a jerk hiring manager like myself, and I'll cop to this, has asked him to find 10 really great candidates in a giant stack of 200 generic applications. And all of a sudden, it's 11 o'clock at night, and all of those applications look exactly the same. So this is about the time when a smart candidate says, wait a second, this is crazy. Why am I wasting my life and my career trying to be a clone? I should be helping this guy out, not making his hard job even harder. And in my case, after 10 years of dumb commodity applications, I finally cracked the recruiter code by doing something different. After talking to all these tech recruiters and hearing their frustrations, I knew that I needed to do two things above all else. First, I know that a recruiter needs clarity. Tons of applications are full of jargon and buzzwords, and they don't really help the recruiter understand the candidate's fit. So instead of my usual boring text-drenched cover letter, I dropped in the chart that you see here, which spelled out exactly how I matched the qualifications in plain English. Not NGO speak, not teacher speak, just straight up, here's what you need, and here's how I've already done that. And the other thing that recruiters need is distinction. Because again, if they've got 200 applications to plow through, it's incredibly difficult to keep track of who's who. So I made sure to include lots of juicy tidbits that would really stand out. For instance, instead of saying, I'm a very analytical thinker or I have great data skills, I would show them, show instead of tell. And I showed them that I had this love for pivot tables and VLOOKUPs because I included an anecdote and a picture of my Halloween costume, which was everyone's favorite superhero, Excel Man. And so you're probably thinking, Jeremy, come on, that's corny. Why would you do that? But the funny thing is that when the LinkedIn recruiter called me out of the blue to offer me an interview, The very first question she had for me is, did you really wear that costume for Halloween? Which meant that anecdote, as small as it was, helped me stand out from the pack. And most importantly, by standing out, by being differentiated, that earned me a spot on the team. So that's my personal story. But the larger point here is that I was, as you will recall, about as generic a talent as they come in the tech world. I couldn't code. I'd never worked at a tech company. I certainly did not meet a lot of techies teaching kindergarten. And so the bottom line and the important takeaway is that it's not about what you start with, it's about how you differentiate yourself in the final equation. So please don't let your background hold you back, and instead find those points of differentiation and use them to stand out. So let me see if there are any questions here. And thank you for everyone for guessing. Great job, Marlon. Marlon rocked it. Christoph absolutely nailed it on behalf of his group. And of course, if there are any questions, keep them coming in through the chat. All right, thanks guys. So it's time for my second to last sin, which was not taking enough shots on goal. And I'll explain what I mean by it in a second. But first, give me an amen in the chat room if, like me, you're addicted to tech blogs. Because I was 10 years ago, and I absolutely still am today. First it was CNET, then it was Gizmodo, then it was Engadget, then it was TechCrunch. Now I read TechMeme and Recode and The Verge. I basically have all of this digital stuff just plugged into my veins because it feels so good to get that constant hit of what's new, what's hot, who raised $100 million, who's going out of business. And also, very subtly, it's an easy way to feel like you're investing in your career. Because you think to yourself, well, at least I'm not reading a celebrity magazine. Reading these tech blogs is actually going to help me get ahead. Unfortunately, if you're a tech job seeker, just like I was, it's also super easy to confuse research with progress. Because I'd spend all day smashing the refresh button on my blogs. Give me more, give me more, give me more, while I was quote unquote getting my work done. And yet, at the end of the week, after all that time on TechCrunch and Gizmodo and Engadget, I'd still have nothing to show for it. And so it was only one day, while watching a football match, that I began to see my mania for what it truly was. All of a sudden, my rose-colored lenses went to the side. And that was the day that I realized that you can only score when you shoot. You know how it works. No matter how fancy your footwork is, no matter how beautiful you're dribbling, you just cannot put points on the board any other way. And so you're probably thinking, okay, duh, that's obvious. And two, Jeremy, you must have been really bad at sports as a kid to realize this when you were 30 years old. And you're pretty much right about that. But bear with me for a second. Because just like a football prima donna who juggles the ball too much because he's too vain to shoot and fail, I let my own fear of failure hold me back from applying. After working so hard to get into B school, I didn't want to face any more rejection. I didn't have the stomach for it. So instead of putting out applications, I comforted myself with the safe and comfortable oblivion of TechCrunch. Now, even though this maxim is sort of impressively simple, you've got to acknowledge that if you're going to break through that psychological wall that stands between you and that cool tech job that you crave, you're going to have to put yourself out there. And you're going to have to manage your time way differently. Because once I acknowledge this maxim, I started to reprioritize my entire schedule. Instead of counting research as progress, I maximize my shots by setting daily goals for applications. And I used a Google Doc to hold myself accountable. 1 application a day, 5 applications a week. Was I hitting my goal? And once I had that accountability built in, I started banging out application after application. It was so easy. Just click that magic red button. Of course, there was just one problem, which was the tiny but inconvenient fact that no matter what I was doing, I still never heard back. And the thing is, as I later learned when I started hiring MBAs at LinkedIn and later at a startup, all those well-intentioned applications, all those shots had been lost in the online application black hole. And online apps really are a wasteland because I want to show you what an online application system actually looks like to a recruiter. So what you're going to see in a second is a real screenshot of the Indeed.com backend. Again, not what you see as an applicant every day when you look for jobs, but what a recruiter or a hiring manager sees when they're looking for talent. And this is the one that I had when I was hiring marketers for my startup. And as you can see, at a very high level, there's not a lot of information to go on. But the crazy thing is, if I wanted to hire any of these people, the first step was to bring them to my CEO for his approval, which basically meant I'd be putting my entire reputation on the line for what was essentially a random line in a database. And so it's really no wonder in retrospect that so many apps get stuck at the stage. But, not to get too nerdy here, just like Stephen Hawking has theorized that certain kinds of radiation can escape a black hole, there were a few random quirks, if you will, that got through. And those, of course, were referrals. Because here's that same exact system, but this time with referrals attached. And instead of 173 no-name applications to suffer through, I now had exactly 2 to laser in on. And remember, they were standing out not just on the basis of luck, but through trust. Not through some fancy technical feats, but through the oldest social technology known to man, predates even MySpace, which was human relationships. Because when it came time to send these applicants to my boss, put my own reputation on the line, you better believe that instead of that stranger, that random line, I sent the sure thing, the one that was vouched for by someone I knew and someone I trusted. And not only have I seen the same story play out time and again on the hiring side, but I've also seen its power in my own job searches. Because as you recall, I wasted a full decade dumping one electronic garbage application after another into what I'll call Google's e-recycling bin. Well, finally, at the end of that decade of futility, I wised up. And what I did is I went to LinkedIn's alumni tool, which you can find to this day at linkedin.com/alumni. And I filtered all of my undergraduate alumni for Google employees. And even though my undergraduate college was tiny, just 300 students in a class, I still found a bunch of Googlers. And even though I didn't know any of them personally, I found one with an interesting background like mine. And so when I reached out to him and I started talking about what he did every day and how much I admired his path, and I shared a little bit of my own experience, we realized we had all these commonalities. The next thing I knew, he was referring me for a job. And then the day after that, this is what I found in my inbox, which is crazy. 11 years down the drain, by my lonesome self, struggling away in anonymity, when all I could have done was just ask someone for help. And yet, as painful as that lesson was, it was also painfully clear. So what I immediately did is I changed up my Google Doc, my accountability sheet, to focus not just on applications, but on networking. Not just on shots, but shots on goal. And with that 1-2 punch of applications and referrals in place, I went from 0 interviews in a decade to 5 interviews in a semester. And so the bottom line is, I know it feels so much safer not to put yourself out there, not to reach out to companies, not to reach out to alumni, to sort of work on your own, disconnected from the rest of the world. But the thing is, if you want to win in this world, in this land of tech, you've really got to focus on what matters, not just what feels good. And so to prove it to you one last time, what I want to do is use your own examples to prove that there are lots of alumni connections out there, no matter the company. So tell me about your dream companies. Go ahead and chat those in. So anything from a tech giant all the way down to a new startup. And I'm going to use LinkedIn's alumni tool, just like I did in my example, to prove that there are cool connections to be had. So go ahead and chat in your dream companies. Thank you to Marlon for shouting out Wired.com. I appreciate that. Again, there are so many digital ways to waste time these days. It's incredible. So what you're going to see pull up on my screen is linkedin.com/alumni for HEC. As you can see, there are about 50,000 alums on LinkedIn already. Not too shabby at all. I see Christoph there as well. I actually just met two of your classmates, Svenja and Audrey, when they took this EdTech World Tour to San Francisco recently. Very cool. And again, chat in the company that you're most excited about, no matter how small, no matter how unknown. And we'll do a little test here for everyone to see. And I'm curious, Christoph, what are folks saying with you? What companies are they most excited about? All right, I'm worried that I might have lost Christoph here, so I'm going to move ahead. Let's just do an example. Here comes Marlon. Marlon, you saved the day. I appreciate it. Amazon. Well, I hate to say it, Amazon is probably not much of a challenge, but we'll use it as an example in any case. If we go ahead and choose Amazon from amongst the 50,000 or so HEC alumni, we'll find out that sure enough, there are 83 folks from HEC working in pretty much every department within the company. Operations, sales, product management, marketing, finance. So you can come in here and you can say, what I really want to do is I want to be a PM at Amazon. And they're your 14 specific alums. And any of these guys, I guarantee you, will be willing to chat with you about their experience. Because the fascinating thing about the human condition is that people might not want to just give you a job on a silver platter, and they might be annoyed if you just ask for one right away. But people love to talk about their own experiences and their own ideas. And so if you reach out and you say, hey, what's a typical day like for you? What do you love about your company? What's not so great? And then finally, after they get to know you a little bit, you say, hey, I would love to follow in your footsteps, but I'm so new to this world. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? And that's sort of the power MBA question, because it's diplomatic and it's tactful and respectful. But it immediately puts them in a position of empathy where they say, here's the real deal. If you want to break into Amazon or Google or whatever the company is, a referral from me is really going to help. Even though I don't know you yet, I'm still going to give you a shot because there was an HEC alum before me who got me in the door. I'm going to pass that on to the next generation. So that is the alumni networking process. Let's just try a couple other here. I see some Google, Ubisoft, BlaBlaCar, Uber. All right, let's try it. So going back here, if we X out of this, just do a couple final examples, and we add an Uber. Oops, I don't think that's right, Uber. My apologies. Here we go. All right, almost 20 alums from HEC at Uber. If we try Ubisoft, great company. 26 alums at Ubisoft. So anyway, the point is, the list goes on and on. But if you guys are not taking advantage of these amazing connections, if you're like me and you're sort of too scared to put yourself out there, you're missing out on tons of opportunity because these alumni have been helped by other alums before, and they're just waiting to help you if you can forge those relationships. So I highly encourage you to take advantage of those impressive opportunities. Thanks everyone for your feedback there. So let's do one last pop quiz. So let's say you finally do break into tech. It's at your dream company. It's in your dream role. You're so excited to start work. Well, now, fast forward a couple years. Imagine it's 2018, 2019, and you've been on the job for 2 or 3 years at a business school. What do you think is the most important factor in whether you're going to be happy in that job? Is it the company status, your compensation, your stock options, how good the food is in the cafeteria? What do you guys think? Go ahead and chat those ideas in right now. Thanks everyone for those great ideas. Tesla, Virgin. I'm guessing HEC is stacked in all those different companies. So Kartik, Marlon, everyone on the line, Christoph, go ahead and type in what you think is most critical to your future happiness. Kartik is first out of the gates. He says, will my work provide a tangible impact to daily lives? Just as sort of this idea of meaning. Will I have a connection between what I do and creating goodness or value in society? Very cool. What else? While you guys are answering, I'm going to respond to a question from Marlon. Marlon says, would you recommend approaching recently graduated students, or perhaps those that graduated 5 years ago? Well, here's the trade-off. So obviously, if you reach out to someone who's an alum from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, chances are they're in a more senior role at their companies. So if you can have a VP advocate for you, obviously that's usually more effective than someone who's just fresh into their role. However, those people are also busier. They're also getting way more requests for their time. And so I would never have a rule of thumb that says only go after VPs, don't go after managers, because even as a manager at LinkedIn, I still had the exact same power to go into the employee referral system as our CEO did and put in the names of people who I thought were worthy candidates. And the fact that I could use that system and get people interviews from my alma mater was really powerful. So please don't rule someone out because they're new from school. Those people have the same access to referrals that anyone does in the company. So Marlon says, impact of the work that everyone does, how fun it is. Do you look forward to coming in every Monday morning? Which is a great point. Monday mornings are tough no matter whether you have an MBA or not. So you got to make sure that it's worthwhile to get out of bed. Christoph says work-life balance, having fun, company culture, leaving a mark. Absolutely. So you guys are already way smarter than I was when I was in your shoes, because back when I was in business school, I was convinced that it was all about prestige. And you guys know exactly how business school is. It's a very, very social environment. Everyone knows everyone else's business, the offers they're getting, the compensation they're receiving. And so you're constantly comparing yourself. It's like a giant FOMO factory, I like to say. Everyone is afraid of missing out based on what their friends are doing. And so when I finally got that offer from Apple, after 11 years of wandering in the desert, the MBA beehive all around me started buzzing and said, Jeremy, that's amazing. You've got to take it. This is an incredible offer and you'd be stupid not to take it. And so I did. The only thing is though, within a month of that very first bus ride to Cupertino that I started out with, the honest truth is that I was miserable. Now don't get me wrong. I was then, and still am to this day, incredibly lucky, incredibly grateful to Apple for that opportunity because it helped to launch my career. But not once in my entire deliberation, pre-start, pre-internship, did I ever stop to think about what Apple was really like. Not about its brand, about its culture, but what it was like on the inside. Because if I had, it would have occurred to me that in some ways, Apple was the antithesis of me. I mean, I'm this kindergarten teacher. I'm the guy who likes to bring people together, help them learn from each other. And Apple, by its very business, by its very marketplace reality, just cannot be like that. Its launches are too rare, too valuable, too secretive to have a culture that's transparent and collaborative. But the thing is, that basic fundamental culture clash never came up in my conversations with classmates. We never talked about what it was like to work there because instead the conversation was so high level. It was like, dude, even your grandma knows Apple. And yeah, maybe that would have helped me out at family dinners, made people respect me more, appreciate me more, or whatever. But ultimately, it was a really dumb way to find happiness. Because, and this is probably the most important thing I'll say this entire conversation, you guys have to remember, what is the point of business school? Not just today, not just this summer or when you graduate, but in the long run. Please don't tell me that you spent 6 figures and 2 years of your life or a year of your life just to pad your resume. just to feel special at cocktail parties where you can brag about the cool companies you work at. What I hope instead is that you left behind that comfortable job and that community because you knew deep in your soul that there was something way better out there. There was a life that could take full advantage of your talents, your passion, the things that you cared about most. And that in the long run of life, that would make you happier. Not just richer, but more valuable, more useful to the world. And so my feeling is if you walk away from these 2 years with a job that your friends want or a job that your friends love, but that actually makes you less happy than the one you came in with, in some way, those 2 years or those years in the business school will be in vain. And that's because as tantalizing as prestige is, to someone's point before, it's never going to get you out of bed in the morning. It's not going to keep you motivated when times are tough. And as Steve Jobs himself once said, prestige should be for someone else to worry about, for someone else's life. Because there are only 2 things that should actually matter to you. And those are, number 1, what do you do all day? And number 2, who do you do it with? Because you can compromise on brand, you can compromise on compensation, even location. But on those 2 things, what you do and who you surround yourself with to make up the majority of your time on this planet, those 2 things you should never settle. Everything else is just superficial in comparison. And so when I told my friends that I didn't want to go back to Apple for full time, again, they thought I was nuts. Jeremy, don't be dumb. Don't give up the sushi chef and the stock options and the fancy bus. But the thing is, as soon as I got to know about LinkedIn and their culture and their way of doing things, I knew that I could never go back. Because getting a chance to work with awesome people, doing the exact things I love, in some senses, in the ultimate sense, that is the best perk of all. So that's my story. But what about yours? How do you find your own right place? Well, here's a trick for you. Here's a method of thinking about it that will help you go even deeper. Because even though you can't predict the future, you can absolutely learn from the past. So take a moment right now. I know it's late, but just pause for a moment and think about your happiest work experiences. Moments when time flew by because you were so engrossed in what you were doing. What psychologists call flow moments. And then, once you identify those moments in your mind, try to think about the environment that surrounded you. Were you on a tiny team where you were just sort of this little David up against the corporate Goliath? Or were you in a larger organization where you loved your job, but you had work-life balance, so you could actually go home to your friends and family at the end of the day and have the best of both worlds? Or maybe the environment around you changed all the time, and you thrived on that change. Well, wherever you are in that world, whatever environments motivate you the most, I hate to say it, but you guys should do the cliched MBA thing, and you should bust out with a 2x2 matrix. I'm really not kidding. Plot yourself out on this chart from small dynamic organizations to larger, more consistent organizations, from tons of balance and free time all the way down to tons of engagement, tons of camaraderie. Figure out where you fall. And then once you know where you are, plot out all the other companies you're considering. Now the warning is, it's so easy to make this a consideration based purely on what you're served on a silver platter. By which I mean all the folks who come to campus, those hardworking recruiters, whose job is to come on and say, hey, if you come work at my company, it's corporate paradise on earth. But of course, they're paid to say that. That's their responsibility. And so what I'd encourage you to do is to peel back those layers and find the truth of the matter by going onto LinkedIn and not just looking up alumni who currently work at those companies, who currently are indebted to a certain organization, but who actually worked at those companies in the past, who now have enough distance to give you the real deal, the inside scoop. Because what you're going to quickly find if you follow that approach is there really is no such thing as the quote-unquote perfect company. Instead, every company has its strengths, every company has its weaknesses, and in the final calculation, some companies just fit you really well and some don't. And so as much as sexiness feels good, know that in the long run, only happiness matters. And again, I've learned all these things not through being especially clever, but by being especially dumb. I've made every single mistake that I've shared with you today, sometimes twice, sometimes even more. And as embarrassing as that is to share, I want to share it. I want to pass that forward so that you don't have to. So, in case you haven't done so already, feel free to grab all these slides right now at breakinto.tech/bonus. In addition to the book about tech jobs, I also have a separate free book all about tech companies. So every major MBA hirer in the tech space, from Amazon down to Uber, I cover their culture, what it's like to work there, how they hire, what they're looking for, and hopefully that gives you some more insight into where your perfect fit really is. So while you do that, while you grab those final slides, feel free to ask any final questions at this point. Anything from, I was a former soldier before business school. How should I get into this world? All the way to, I'm really focused on startups, but how would I negotiate equity with them? What's reasonable? Anything from the start of the process to the end of the process, I'm happy to take on right now with absolutely no filter. So go ahead and chat those questions in. So it looks like no questions at this point. If you guys have them, Kartik, Marlon, Christoph, please go ahead and type those in. Otherwise, I'm going to finish up in about 30 seconds here. Remember, I'm happy to take on any question from how do you convince recruiters all the way to where will I be happiest out there in the wide world of tech. All right. Well, thank you everyone for a great conversation today. I've got some final thoughts for you because even though I've just spent almost 90 minutes trying to really impress upon you how exciting tech is and how different tech is, I will also be the first to admit the journey to tech is a long and hard one. And it's probably so much easier to just sort of do the traditional path, which is go to business school, become a consultant, become a banker, be a marketer at a big CPG company, because those companies make it easy for you right on campus. But I've got to tell you, having gone down this road and lived to tell the story, it's also so rewarding. I mean, where else do you literally get to invent the future? So many of those other traditional employers, if you think about it, if you dig deeply underneath what they're asking you to do, they're really about embracing the status quo. We've been the leader in our industry for 100 years, for 200 years. How do we stay at the top for another century? Whereas in tech, things are changing. Things are constantly being innovated and challenged day after day. And while that's difficult, it does give you this incredible opportunity to be at the forefront of what's new, not what's the same, and to work with such awesome people along the way. So even though the journey is super tough, just know that I'm always happy to help along the path. So that means you should never hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn or through my website, because I'm happy to open my network to you, to answer any questions you might have, or just strategize about any challenge you might be facing. In the meantime, though, here's wishing you the best of luck with your journey. And I'm wishing you all very happy travels along the road to tech. Thanks so much, everyone.